So, we all know how Mr. Covey wrote Frederick Douglass.
Mr. Covey really beat Douglass till he felt no longer alive.
Yeah, it was very sad and probably very traumatizing for him.
Do you guys think that if Frederick Douglass hadn't have been as disobedient as he was with Mr. Auld, that he would have been sent to Covey in the first place?
I don't think Douglass was being disobedient.
He was. I feel like he was a little bit more. He talked back more than the common slave.
Yeah, I think he was like more used to being a house slave, so
Than being a worker.
yeah, so like once he became a worker, he wasn't used to it, and so he kind of acted the way he did without knowing that he wasn't supposed to. Think about the first time that he was in. Do you think it was fair? Or?
I'm pretty sure it was gruesome to Frederick Douglass because he was never a part of that. He was never shown what it was actually meant to be whipped because, like, he was never a field worker. He was mainly inside and he avoided all of that most of his entire life.
It wasn't fair, but I think if it had never happened, he would not have become who he was known for and as. So it was wrong, but I believe that it actually helped him in discovering who he was.
In the excerpt from chapter 43, it talks about the turning point with Mr. Covey and Frederick Douglass. I thought it was very interesting for a slave to fight back with slave owner.
I thought it was surprising, yet predictable. Surprising because it was very dangerous for a slave to try and fight back with their slave owner, because most of the time the slave owners were very educated and the slaves had no education whatsoever. They could not read, they could not write. However, Frederick Douglass was
Given the opportunity.
He was given the opportunity to read and write, and he was a very intelligent man. And whenever Mr. Covey had done what he did to him, which was the severe beatings and putting him in the field for labor work, he felt it wasn't fair because, one, he was never an outside slave. He was never one for labor.
He was always secluded from that.
Mr. Covey was just a very horrible man for his slaves actually being human. He would beat them for that. And
the part where Frederick Douglass is being educated, I think it was very fortunate of him because despite the consequences, he still went ahead and took the chance, basically telling himself, I want to learn this, I want to continue learning, I want to be able to read and write, and that was his goal ultimately, and he met it. Afterwards, he taught other slaves, this letter, like their ABCs, and eventually they learned as well.
Yes, I believe that his bravery came from his knowledge, because most of them were used to being treated like animals, and they really knew nothing better. They didn't know much about, how badly they were actually being treated only because it was
That's the only thing
so
they were known
common.
to.
It was so common, but he knew because he knew the morals, and he knew that everything that they were doing was wrong. And I believe that his courage came from how much he knew and how intelligent he was.
Do you think from being an inside slave that it gave him more of an insight to know how wrong slavery was? Since more of the workers on the field did experience more beatings than those that were inside.
I believe that he was sheltered from
birth, right?
He was very sheltered from birth because he was an inside slave, and they're not the same as the labor workers that go outside. So it was fairly new to him. Did you expect Frederick Douglass to fight back?
At this point, yes, because you had already seen, like, some minor turning points in his thoughts and how he thought, he was starting to realize that he didn't deserve this type of life and that he wanted more. So, I think I did see the fight coming.
Do you think that it was wrong of Frederick Douglass to fight back?
Not wrong, because what he was fighting for was right, but wrong in the sense that he knows that it could cause him further harm in the future because of his actions. He might get killed because of what he did.
Do you think Frederick Douglass's approach was smart in a sense? Or
No.
let me rephrase it. Do you believe that Frederick Douglass's intelligence had anything to do with him fighting back?
Yes, I would think so, because the more educated you are, the more you know that what they're doing is wrong and that they don't necessarily need to have those lives. They can change it. So I think Frederick Douglass's education did help him realize and lead to the turning point in which he fought Mr. Covey.
Do you believe that if Frederick Douglass was more obedient than he was, he would have not have been put in that situation where he was sent to Mr. Covey?
Yes, that is true. If he was more obedient, he wouldn't have been transferred to Mr. Covey for a year, because he would have stayed with his previous master and probably not have led to that turning point.
If Frederick Douglass hadn't have been as intelligent as the rest of the slaves, do you think he would have become the person he became?
No, because, unless he found further education later along his life, but I think the fact that having education so early on when he was a young slave, that really helped him.
Do you believe Frederick Douglass's intelligence had anything to do with the man he became?
Yes, I think it does, because his intelligence or education from his early years helped him progress his curiosity and made him realize that he didn't need to be a slave and that, it wasn't morally right. So just by educating himself and reading about, abolitionist, views, he was able to become that and help his fellow brethren be free themselves.
If Frederick Douglass had been as obedient as an average slave, do you believe that he would have become the man that we know of him today as?
Well, he wasn't like the average slave because he had more intelligence than them. With Mr. Covey, he was able to defend himself and stand up for himself because he knew that it was wrong and he had that intelligence to be able to stand up for himself. He wasn't like the others who just lived their life so routinely and didn't know that there was more and that they shouldn't have had to do that. They knew that, but he had this extended education that made him differ from them, and he wasn't as obedient as them because he knew that he knew he had enough intelligence and confidence in himself to stand up for what he believed was right, and he was able to fight against Mr. Covey or defend himself, and he was able to get Mr. Covey to leave him alone as well, which was what he wanted, and that did help him become the person he was in the end, because if he wouldn't have stood up for himself without anything, he probably would have had to go through worse, and he probably wouldn't have known enough to share his fight against slavery in the end in Nantucket at the convention. And yeah, I do think that, yes.
Did you expect Frederick Douglass to react the way he did to Mr. Covey in the Turning Point?
Well, honestly, if I were in that position, I would have been fearful, and I didn't expect it because I didn't think that he would go to that extent, because Mr. Covey was powerful, and that's how things were, that he was powerful and he was able to do that. And no slaves ever did do that, ever go against them, because that wasn't what they did. They knew that they had to work and that they had to accept the torture and the punishments, but he went up against it, and I didn't expect it because it just wasn't the normal thing to do, but I'm glad he did it.
Do you believe that, what do you believe was the motivation behind Frederick Douglass's response? Was it fear or was it knowledge?
I don't think he was fearful at all for it. I do believe his knowledge had a big part of it, though, because he knew more, and the slave owners, they were able to feel that they were powerful because, I mean, they did have that power, but they had more knowledge. They had more knowledge than the rest, than their slaves, but Frederick Douglass was almost an equivalent to him, or probably even further than that, and his knowledge was what motivated him to understand that it was wrong to have to go through that, and wrong, and he knew of defending himself, and he knew of standing up